Okay, so let's dive into sequence models. You've seen the incredible progress, right? Models handling text, audio, time series. I mean, they're just everywhere.
Absolutely, we've come such a long way.
Yeah, from like the early RNNs back in the 80s, then LSTMs tackling longer memory, WaveNet using convolution, all the way up to Transformers in 2017. That felt like a real shakeup.
Attention is all you need. Yeah, change the game. And now we have things like S4D pushing things even further. The results on complex tasks are, well, pretty amazing.
They really are. And this is the core thing, isn't it? Despite all these different architectures, do we really get why one works better than another for certain kind of time-based patterns, or why they sometimes fail?
That's the million-dollar question. Because the way we usually test them, it doesn't really tell us the why.
Exactly. We throw them at these massive, kind of messy real-world data sets, long-range arena, long bench, stuff like IMDb reviews, Wikitext articles, the pile.
Right, which are great for seeing if they work in practice. But in terms of understanding what temporal structure they're capturing, they're like black boxes.
Totally. They've got all sorts of dependencies mixed together. So if a transformer beats an LSTM on, say, long bench, you can't easily point and say, it won because it nailed that specific long range thing, or the LSTM missed this kind of slow decay.
You just get the final score. You don't get that deeper theoretical insight into the model's actual capabilities.
Which brings us to this really interesting new preprint we're looking at today. Numerical Investigation of Sequence Modeling Theory Using Controllable Memory Functions by Jiang, Bao, Wang, and Lei.
Yes. And their core idea is brilliant, really. They basically flip the problem around.
How so?
Instead of using that messy real-world data where you don't know what's going on temporarily, they build synthetic artificial data sets. The key is the temporal dependencies in these data sets are mathematically defined and you can control them.
Controllable. Okay, so that's the mission for this deep dive then, for you listening. We're going to unpack this synthetic approach. It's less about chasing benchmark numbers
Right.
and more about getting into the, let's say, academic side, the fundamental properties of these models. What does this controlled setup reveal about why they work or don't work in specific ways? Insights you just can't easily get from real data.
It's all about isolating the variables. If you want to test how a model handles, say, exponentially decaying memory, you generate data that only has that kind of memory.
And nothing else complicating it.
Exactly. Then you can turn up the difficulty dial on that specific memory type and see where the model starts to struggle.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So the heart of this is the memory function. What exactly is this thing?
Okay, so mathematically, rho of s, alpha, it's a function. It takes s, which is just the time difference, how far back you're looking.
Like 10 steps ago, 100 steps ago.
Precisely. And it takes L alpha, which is this parameter we can tune, and it spits out a weight. That weight tells you how much influence the input from S steps ago should have on the output right now.
Okay, so it's basically defining the perfect response we want the model to learn. A bit like an impulse response in control theory.
Exactly like that. It's a direct parallel to impulse response in linear systems. Think Oppenheim signals and systems. In a simple linear case, the output is just the input convolved with this memory function.
Got it. And the alpha, the A, that's the controllable part you mentioned.
That's the knob you turn. By changing A, you change the memory characteristic. You could make it decay slower, or push a key dependency further back in time, or change the whole pattern in a very specific mathematical way.
So you can systematically test how models cope as that specific memory task gets harder.
That's the power. You're not just hoping your real-world data has some polynomial decay. You generate polynomial decay, and you control exactly how slow it is with alpha.
Nice. So you can create families of tasks, each targeting a specific memory type across a range of difficulties.
Yep, and then you measure how well the model reconstructs the target output for each task, usually with some kind of error measure that maps out its strengths and weaknesses for different memory types.
And this paper focuses on 4 specific memory functions, right, to cover different kinds of temporal changes.
Right, they picked 4 that represent distinct problems. First, exponential decay, X. That's defined as XBHP.
Okay, exponential decay sounds like things drop off fast.
Very fast. It means recent inputs matter way more than older ones, like a quick echo that shades almost immediately.
Simple case. What's next?
Polynomial decay, corpally, defined as 1 plus s. Raised to the power, this decay is much slower than exponential.
So past inputs stick around longer. More influence from further back.
Considerably longer, yeah. It's a more lingering memory. Then third is the impulse function of the zero.
Impulse, okay.
This one's defined as 1 if s equals some value and 0 otherwise. So the output depends only on the input from one single specific time step in the past, potentially very far back.
So it's super sparse, only one point in the past matters at all.
Exactly. Maximally sparse. Finding that one relevant input, especially if it's way back, is a very different challenge than capturing a gradual decay.
I can see that. And the fourth one?
The Airy function, Ri, this one's a bit more complex, uses a truncated Airy function. Its role is to control the degree of sparsity.
Degree of sparsity. How does that work?
As you increase alpha for the Airy function, the region where the function is non-zero actually shifts outwards and spreads out. So counterintuitively, as alpha goes up, the dependency becomes less sparse.
Huh. So it goes from maybe a tight cluster of important pass points to a more spread out region?
Something like that. It lets them test how models handle dependencies that aren't just point sparse or fully dense, but somewhere in between, and how that changes with alpha.
Okay, four quite different patterns. Fast decay, slow decay, single point long range, and variable sparsity. Now, you mentioned error measures. They had to do some technical stuff for fair comparisons. Scaling functions, RMSE.
Yeah, two key things. First, these scaling functions for each memory type. They basically translate the abstract alpha value into a concrete timescale or decay parameter that makes sense for the sequence length you're generating.
So an alpha of, say, zero point 0.5 might mean a decay constant of x for exponential, but an impulse distance of y for the impulse function. Handles that mapping.
Precisely. Ensures alpha represents a comparable level of difficulty across function types. Second, they used relative mean squared error, or RMSE.
Why relative?
Because the actual size or scale of the output signal can vary a lot depending on the memory function in alpha. Standard MSE could be huge just because the output numbers are huge, not because the model did a bad job approximating the shape of the memory.
Ah, okay. So RMSE normalizes by the energy of the true signal.
Exactly. It tells you how well the model captured the pattern, the relative influence over time, regardless of the overall output magnitude. Makes comparisons much fairer.
Makes sense. You want to know about the approximation quality itself. Okay, cool setup. So what happened when they actually tested models on this? Which ones did they look at?
They ran LSTM, S4D, TCNs, temporal convolutional networks, and transformers through this synthetic gauntlet.
Let's start with the recurrent ones, LSTM and S4D. How did they fare?
Pretty much as theory predicts, actually, which is good validation for the framework for exponential decay, X3.
The easy one.
Yeah, the fast echo. Both LSTM and S4D did great. Low, stable error, even as alpha increased. They handle that rapid decay really well.
Okay, no surprise there. What about the slower polynomial decay?
That's where they started to struggle. As alpha increased, making the decay slower and slower, the error for both LSTM and S4D went up significantly.
So capturing those longer lasting influences is harder for them.
Definitely. And this matches up with previous theoretical work showing limitations of recurrent models on polynomial targets.
Right. And the really tough one for RNNs traditionally, the impulse, the single point far back.
Oh yeah, they struggle badly there. The error shot up really fast as alpha increased, pushing that impulse further away. It just highlights that known difficulty recurrent nets have with these sparse long-range dependencies. Goes way back to Bengio and others pointing this out.
So the synthetic tests perfectly showed the known strengths and weaknesses of LSTMs and S4D in a really clear, controlled way.
Exactly. Validated the knowns. Then things got really interesting with the TCNs. This is where some of the paper's novel insights start popping up.
Okay, temporal convolutional networks, what did they find?
First off, on the impulse function, TCNs were excellent. Really low, stable error across alpha.
So they can find that needle in the haystack, that single point far back.
Seems so. Thanks to their dilated convolutions, their receptive field can grow exponentially, letting them see very far back quite efficiently to pick out specific points. This confirms other work suggesting TCNs are good at sparse stuff.
Okay, but you said there were new insights.
Yes, here's innovative insight number one. While TCNs were great at the maximally sparse impulse function, their performance got noticeably worse on the Airy function, AI, as alpha increased.
Wait, but you said Airy gets less sparse as alpha increases?
Exactly. So TCNs are good when it's one single point, super sparse, but they struggle more when that dependency becomes less sparse and more spread out, even if it's still,
That's counterintuitive.
it gets better. The really surprising thing was that TCN performance also degraded on exponential, Rex, and polynomial decay as alpha increased.
Okay.
Now think about this. For exponential and polynomial decay, increasing alpha makes the decay slower, but it doesn't change the fact that the function is non-zero basically everywhere in its tail. The binary sparsity doesn't change with alpha for those two.
Right. It's always non-zero far out, just the values get smaller slower. So if binary sparsity isn't the problem for exponential or polynomial, why do TCNs struggle more as alpha increases there?
This is the cool part. This observation led the authors to propose a new way to think about complexity for TCNs. Let's call it Innovative Concept 2, tail energy.
Tail energy, what's that?
They define this measure, CASS, that basically calculates the cumulative energy or weight in the tail of the memory function, all the smaller contributions after the main peak are the most significant part.
So it's not just is it zero or non-zero way out there, but how much total influence, even if small, is coming from that long tail.
Exactly. And what we found was a really clear, strong, positive correlation between this tail energy measure and the actual error that TCNs were making on Rex, Cripply, and Raw.
Wow, so this tail energy idea actually explained the TCN performance degradation across all three of those functions much better than just thinking about binary sparsity.
Precisely. It suggests that for TCNs, it's not just about whether a dependency is sparse or dense, but also about how much energy is spread out in the long tail of the influence function. That's a really valuable academic contribution.
Yeah, that gives a much more nuanced theoretical handle on TCN limits, not just sparsidence.
Right, and they mentioned it's a more practical measure than some other complex theoretical ones based on matrix ranks. They even connected to TCN approximation bounds, theoretically in the paper's appendix.
Very neat. Anything else on TCNs, like how they trained?
Yeah, they did note that TCNs seemed quite sensitive to how you initialize them, and which optimizer you use, ADA versus ADA-W, showed noticeable differences, especially on those trickier impulse and airy functions, hints at optimization being a factor too.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift to the big one, transformers. How did they stack up in this synthetic playground?
This was maybe one of the most surprising results in the whole paper. Transformers, well, they looked remarkably similar to TCNs in terms of their overall performance trend.
Similar to TCNs. Really, but they work so differently internally, attention versus convolutions.
I know, right? It was striking. Just like TCNs, the transformers error increased as alpha went up for exponential, polynomial, and airy decay. And also like TCNs, their error stayed low and stable for the sparse impulse function.
That is weird. What's the explanation? Are transformers secretly just doing convolutions somehow?
Well, not exactly. The paper connects this to the theory behind attention, and this is innovative insight number 2. They reference some related work suggesting that how hard it is for a transformer to approximate something is linked to the properties of its attention matrix, specifically its effective rank or its spectrum.
The spectrum of the attention matrix. Okay, break that down a bit. What does that mean practically?
Think of the spectrum like how the importance or energy of the matrix is distributed across its different dimensions or components. If the spectrum decays slowly, it means the energy is spread out across many components. The matrix is effectively higher rank, and theory suggests that's harder for a transformer to handle well.
Okay.
And what they found is that for exponential, polynomial, and airy decay, as alpha increased, making them harder empirically, the spectrum of the learned attention matrix decayed slower. But for the impulse function, where performance was stable, the spectrum didn't change much with alpha.
Ah, I get it. So the theoretical difficulty, slower spectrum decay, higher rank, matched up perfectly with the practical difficulty, higher error they observed across the different memory functions and alpha values.
Exactly. I provides this really elegant theoretical explanation rooted in the attention mechanism itself for why transformers perform the way they did on these specific controlled temporal patterns. A really nice connection.
That's a powerful insight. What about up to transformer details, like positional encoding? That must matter here.
Oh, usually. They really stress this. The type of positional encoding you use, they tested absolute, relative T5 style, rotary, robes. It makes a big difference. Each type seems to bake in its own kind of intrinsic temporal structure or bias.
How did that play out?
It particularly affected how well they handled the impulse function. Relative encoding seemed pretty robust for impulse across different alphas, but rotary and T5 showed more complicated patterns, sometimes getting worse as alpha changed in non-obvious ways.
So the way you tell the transformer where things are fundamentally changes how it learns what temporal patterns matter.
Absolutely, it's not just location information, it's embedding assumptions about time, a really key academic point.
And they looked inside the architecture too, like number of heads versus the size of each head.
Yes, and this uncovered another really fascinating and complex finding. Let's call this innovative insight number 3. They looked at the trade-off. If you keep the total hidden dimension the same, is it better to have more heads with smaller dimensions each or fewer heads with bigger dimensions?
And the answer is?
It depends. It depends strongly on the memory function and on alpha. There wasn't one simple answer.
Really? How did it vary?
For exponential and polynomial decay, having more heads helped initially, especially at low alpha. But as alpha increased, making the task harder, it became non-monotonic. Adding more heads helped up to a point, but then performance actually got worse again.
So more heads isn't always better, especially for harder tasks.
Apparently not for those decay types. And for the impulse function, it was non-monotonic across all alpha values. More heads could actively hurt performance sometimes. Only for the area function did it seem like more heads generally helped or didn't hurt much.
Wow. Okay, so the optimal internal configuration of a transformer isn't fixed. It depends on the specific nature and difficulty of the temporal pattern you're trying to capture.
Exactly that. And this complex non-monotonic behavior isn't fully understood theoretically. The paper mentions other recent work bumping into this too. This synthetic setup just makes it really clear and measurable.
Super interesting. Okay, so beyond just how well the models approximated these things, did the paper touch on how easy it was to train them? Optimization, speed.
A little bit, yeah. We mentioned the TCN sensitivity to optimizers and initialization already.
Right. What about training time?
The most dramatic finding here was for LSTMs trying to learn the impulse function. As alpha increased, meaning the impulse was further and further back in time, the number of training steps the LSTM needed to actually converge just exploded.
Like exponentially.
It looked like it was increasing dramatically, yeah. This lines up with theories suggesting recurrent models might need way more training time for very long-range dependencies.
So for LSTMs, tackling that distant impulse isn't just hard in terms of final accuracy, it's also potentially incredibly slow to even learn in the first place.
That's what the data suggests, a real efficiency bottleneck for that architecture on that problem type. TCN training speed was generally okay, but they did see some instability or increased steps for impulse, again hinting at that sensitivity.
Okay, so wrapping this up, this synthetic framework from Jiang and colleagues, it really seems like a powerful lens. It lets you peel back the layers on these sequence models in a way that messy real data just doesn't.
Totally. It gives you concrete numbers that, yes, validate some things we already suspected from theory, but more importantly, it uncovers these really significant new phenomena that were kind of hidden before.
And if you had to pick the biggest, newest takeaways, the key academic contributions here for people working with these models.
I'd point to three main things. First, that tail energy concept as a better way to measure complexity for TCNs, moving beyond simple sparsity.
Right.
Second, the clear connection between the transformer's attention spectrum dynamics, theoretical link.
Hmm.
And third, that really complex, non-monotonic trade-off between heads and hidden dimension in transformers, showing how it depends on the actual memory structure you're targeting.
Those are definitely not just benchmark scores. They're fundamental insights into how these architectures actually function.
Exactly. They get at the why.
It really suggests that, alongside scaling models on massive real data sets, this kind of controlled, more academic investigation is crucial for really understanding what's going on under the hood.
Couldn't agree more. And the open questions the paper leaves us with really drive that home. Why does that head dimension trade-off happen? What are the specific biases of different position encodings? How does the target memory shape the entire training process?
Yeah.
These are deep questions this framework helps reveal. Answering them feels pretty critical if we want to design the next generation of sequence models more intelligently.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it, about that gap between just seeing models work empirically and truly understanding the fundamentals. This kind of controlled study seems vital for bridging that gap.